Good morning, guys. Again, welcome to Family of Grace. My name is Jordan. You guys know the stories about the buddies who are in the military, and the friend saves his friend, and so the guy follows him around for the rest of his life. You know, like, you saved my life, so my life is now going to be lived like with and for you. It was kind of like that, or in the words of the Washington guy whose life was saved while he was snowboarding, you know, the drinks are on me from here on out. A couple years ago, there was a video that went viral of a guy skiing Mount Baker up in Washington. It was a beautiful day, lots of fresh powder, and he is clearly in the out-of-bounds area going through the trees. And as he's skiing through one tree after the next, he comes through this particular point and turns right, and there's this flash of red in the bottom of his GoPro camera. And he stops and he turns around, and there on the mountainside is a snowboard with two little feet attached to the bottom of it. And he realizes here's a snowboarder who is buried headfirst in the snow, in the out-of-bounds area on Mount Baker. There is no one around. And he panics, because as kind of funny looking as it is, he realizes here is someone who is stuck, and if I don't do something, they will die. And so he starts trying to step his way up the mountain to get to the person, and that's not working. So he finally pops his skis off, and he climbs up the slope, and then grabs the person's snowboard, and is like, hey, we're going to get you out of here. And he starts digging with his hands frantically. And after a few minutes, a hand and then an arm emerges as this person's in the snow, and he just keeps going. If you watch the video, there are a lot of bleeped out sections because he's kind of panicking for a little bit. But eventually, he uncovers someone's visor, and then with the last hand grab, he clears the airway of this buried snowboarder. He's like, hey, dude, are you okay? And you hear the guy kind of mumbling from the snow, yeah, I'm all right. And he's like, okay, good. We're going to catch our breaths for a minute. And then I'm going to dig you out of here. And what had happened is this snowboarder who loved this mountain was hitting that fresh powder too, but got too much speed, and so he went to turn sharply, and he lost his balance, and he fell backwards into the divot caused by a tree. And so he fell with his head below him, and all of that fresh powder that he was enjoying fell on top of him and locked him in. And so he's in darkness, and he can hear on the radio his buddies are like, hey, dude, where are you at? And he's like, oh, no. They're further down the mountain. They don't know where I'm at, and I can't move. And here in about 10 or 15 minutes, I will no longer be able to breathe, and reality sets in. I'm going to die here. Until against all hope, some random person grabs his snowboard and starts digging him out. And so later, the news crew, following up on the story, are interviewing him. And yeah, he says, it's like those guys in the military. When someone saves your life, you follow them around for the rest of your life. He's like, it's like that. And the drinks are on me from here on out. And so my question to start this morning is, does that feel like an appropriate response? Someone saves your life, and you're like, I'm going to take care of the drinks from here on out. All right, just raise your hands. Does that feel appropriate? Does anyone disagree? Is anyone like, no, man, one $8 Taco Bell box and you should be good? Okay, I didn't think so, but I'm glad you said that, because I have something to share with you, family of grace. This is from Romans 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. I urge you, I summon you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. Do you remember what he's done for you? To offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Or is God just worth a couple drinks? In Romans 12, Paul is pivoting. You thought Romans was all about the gospel, and you're only partially right. For 11 chapters, Paul has been telling us this is what is true of us now because of Jesus Christ. But the aim of everything that has been said is that we would not be the same people afterwards. This is meant to change our lives. That if God has saved us and spared us and blessed us, not because of something that we have done, but because he is that good. If he saved us in Jesus by trusting in Jesus alone, then our lives cannot and should not ever be the same. It's meant to transform us. And so he says, brothers and sisters, in light of God's mercy, which is a really nice way to summarize 11 chapters of Paul going off about this. Offer your bodies, your everythings, your all of yous, and every parts of yous, with no exceptions. Offer everything to God as a sacrifice. And if we wanted to read this in a really old, not very good English translation that is very wooden and literal, it says, as a sacrifice, living, holy, pleasing. 3 adjectives to describe what kind of sacrifice we're talking about. Be a living sacrifice. All right, because you have died with Jesus through baptism, you were spiritually buried with him, and just as Jesus was raised from the dead and now lives forever in God's presence to worship and serve and adore his Father on our behalf, so you too present yourselves alive to God as those in Christ Jesus. It means life from here on out is lived for God, with God, to God. The words that Paul is using, sacrifice and service, are the words of the Old Testament sacrificial system, or of temples. All right, the animals that die and the priests and the Levites that serve, both parts are now for us to play. Be a sacrifice. Be someone whose life is God's now for whatever he has. And then also be holy. And I love that word holy because it gives me an opportunity to explain it, because we just don't use it in America ever. So, to remind you, it might have been a year or two. All right, holy means separate, not for everyday use, consecrated, devoted for something special. And my favorite illustrations are like your grandmother's, or for some of you, your great-grandmother's, holy dishes that live in that holy cabinet. Some of them have fancy light tracks, the china, that do not come out every day, but maybe for Thanksgiving, for a special occasion, they will be brought out to serve the family on a special occasion. We have holy places in America. Our national parks, Multnomah Falls, is a holy place, a place that is so beautiful that among all our options for places to throw our trash, we say not there. Of all the places we have to put in an Amazon distribution center, not there. It's holy. We are going to do our best to keep it pristine. We have other holy places here in Portland. In all the hospitals, we have the NICU, which for you kids means the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. It's for premature babies to get well and stable enough that one day they can go home to live with mom and dad. It is a holy place, and I don't care who you are, you can't just go in there anytime you want. If you are sick, if you are infected, you don't get to go in there. Because what is happening in there is so precious, it's so special, don't you dare contaminate that place. And it's not just about being in the proper state to be able to enter. You have to have the right authority. If you are not a medical staff member or a parent, we're not, assuming everything's working the way it should be, you don't get to go in there. All right? It is a holy, special place. We have athletes in American culture. They live holy lives. They don't get to do what the rest of us do. They don't get to binge on potato chips and stream Netflix and live on their couch. I mean, they could, but they live a holy life. Not so that they can live a less fulfilling life, but so they can live a more fulfilling life. They are devoted to performing at the highest levels of human potential. And so they enter strict training. Everything they eat, everything that they do is on a regimen so that when the time comes, they can perform like no one has ever performed before. They live a holy life. And in practice, this one is a little bit hard, but our president, I know, is a holy person. I know. And what I mean by that is that if a global crisis happens this afternoon, unless, my apartment is destroyed. I can go to sleep tonight. Not my problem. His problem. Because if an emergency happens, it is the president's holy duty to lead our country through it. I'm glad I don't have that job. Thank you very much. I have enough stress in my life. It is his privilege and his responsibility and his duty. He is separate from having to do his own laundry. He is devoted from having to even make his own meals. Why? Because if an emergency happens, it's on his shoulders, and it's his responsibility. So you too, live a holy life of sacrifice unto God. You are not your own. You are bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God with your bodies, which means, family of grace, that you don't get to do anything you want to do. You don't get to live any way you want to live, to do anything you want to do work-wise, to spend your money any way that you darn well please. You don't get to live like everybody else. Why? Because you belong to God now. And God's ownership of our lives is going to influence everything from the clothes we wear to the relationships we have, the way we spend our money, the way we express our sexuality. Nothing is off limits. Why? So that we can live a more restrained and less fulfilling kind of life? No. No, because God has called us to live in his presence as holy people and to be part of a holy work. And so, unlike society, our identity and our hope is not wrapped up in how much money we have in the bank. At least it shouldn't be. Not our 401k, not the state of the economy. We don't have to pull out our hair because, is the AI bubble going to crash or not? We have a good Father who loves us. And we are devoted to his work. And even if the economy goes crazy, we trust him. And we're going to live generous lives. We don't have to silo ourselves in. We can still meet the needs of our neighbors because God is taking care of us. We live a holy, dedicated life. After all, God has done enough for us, hasn't he? To be a living sacrifice, to be a holy sacrifice, to be a pleasing sacrifice. I like this one kind of, because I wake up every day going I'm not sure, God, that I'm really living into this. What does it mean to live a life that pleases God? And my best take at it is to point you to a different place in the scriptures, to the prophet Malachi. So a few hundred years before Paul was alive, there's a prophet named Malachi who's coming against the people of Israel with a complaint from God. Israel, you are checking all of the sacrificial boxes, twice a day at sunrise and sunset, one male lamb for a sin offering, They're doing the thing, but in a very, very poor way. They're giving God the scraps, the trash, and the leftovers. We've got one sick lamb on our hands. Do you want to eat that? No. Let's give it to God. Sounds great. And here's this lame, three-legged beast that's blind and oozing. It's we'll offer that one to God because he doesn't really care. And God says, guess what? I care. You offer that to your governor. Will he accept you? The idea of making a sacrifice that is not pleasing to God carries this idea of treating God as if he's cheap. As if he doesn't really matter. As if Jesus died and accomplished very little on our behalf. It's an $8 Taco Bell meal in response to a guy saving your life. If we're going to live a life of a pleasing sacrifice to God, then do we show God and other people that what was accomplished on our behalf was significant in any way? Not to say that we're going to get it perfect, but to say this was significant enough that my life can never be the same again. So some of you guys, a couple years ago, went through a class with me, and as part of that, we were to write a morning prayer of commitment. And it went something like this. At least mine does. Father, today I commit to you my life and my energy and my resources. All that I am and all that I have, they are yours, Father, to do with as you will. Why? Because your Son is Lord of my life, and he has purchased me by his blood. Therefore, there's nothing that I will hold back from you, and there's nothing you cannot ask of me. Offering you my body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to you, is the only reasonable response to the mercies that you have shown. This just makes sense, Paul says. Our lives should never be the same. So how do we live in response to what God has done? Well, Paul has about 4 chapters of things to tell us. But in chapter 12, he puts it into 4 different categories. Verse 1 and 2, this is how to respond to God. Verse 3 through 8, this is how to respond in our relationships to one another as the church. Verses 9 through 12 or 13, this is just life in general and other people, and then lastly, our enemies. Because of what God has done for us, every aspect of our relational identity should be changed and shifted. But we have to think it through so we can live it out. We have to live in light of the gospel and think about it more and more and more so we can act it out again and again and again. And Paul's going to tell us how to do that. Verse 2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Stage 1, don't do what everyone else is doing. Don't live according to the pattern of this world, but instead, renew your mind in order to be transformed. And the result is that you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. So let's go step by step through it. Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world. That could be just don't live like everyone else, and there's enough there to fill a lot of sermon messages. But I think, more than anything, Paul is taking us back to what he said in chapter 1. The problem with humanity is that we are doing some terrible things in the world. And the reason that we're doing these awful things is because we have fundamentally believed a lie. We have suppressed what is true. God has revealed himself as God, and instead of acknowledging him as God and giving him thanks, we have turned and put something else at the center of our existence. You know, we kicked the sun out and we're putting the earth again at the center of the universe, or ourselves, or a relationship, or a career, or a job, or our finances, or our pleasure, whatever it is. Something else is now the thing around which we orbit, which is what worship is all about. What is most worthy of orienting every aspect of my life around? Humans believed a lie. And like ripping the magnet out of a compass, now we're left with an instrument that really is no accurate guide for how we're supposed to live. We believed a lie, and so now Paul says our thoughts are futile. They don't actually accord with reality the way it actually is. And so we're not thinking the right thoughts. And if we're not thinking the right thoughts, then the problem is we're not desiring the right kind of things. Humans now desire things that don't make any sense. So if you know anyone who is living a life craving things that aren't actually good for them, that don't really make their life flourish, if you've ever been somebody who's like, I know this is bad for me, but I want it anyway, you know what we're talking about. Our hearts and our desires are disordered. And because of that, and God in his wrath says, fine, that's what you want, take it. We have dishonored our bodies. We're doing things that are despicable and worthy of death and giving approval to other people. This is the human condition. And Paul says, guys, because of Jesus now, it's time to get all of that back online. Get that magnet back in the compass. Acknowledge God and give him thanks. Don't conform to the pattern of this world, but instead start with your thoughts. Get these things back on track. Renew your mind. Which means to meditate over and over again about the gospel, to think about it over and over again, to think more as a Christian and not less. What has God done for us? What is his mercies? What has Jesus accomplished by dying in my place apart from anything that I have done to deserve it? Think about it more and more and more and more. So why? So that our hearts might be transformed, so that we might begin to desire the actual right things. And then here's what's going to happen. The more our brains are online and the more our desires are online, the more we come to realize how, as Paul says it, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. I used to think, up until yesterday morning, that was like a trial and error. We're going to figure out what God's will is. You know, we're going to try this and we're going to try that, and we're going to here, this is what God wants. And then yesterday morning it struck me like, I think it means something different. I think the phrase able to test and approve is just one word, and it's kind of like when you go down to the local gas station to put a couple of overpriced gallons of fuel into your car, there should be a sticker on the machine that this scale, this pump, has been tested and approved by whatever government official is responsible for inspecting things. It will give you a full gallon, not like 3/4 of a gallon and then charge you for a full one. No, it has been tested and approved. It's valid. You can trust it. I think the more we get our brains online, the more we find our hearts put in their proper places, the more we're going to be able to look at what God's will actually is and go, yes, that is good. I have tested and I approve. That's the way to live. Does that make sense? Is that different? It's not about like stumbling around in the dark until we can figure this thing out. It's about, no, I have lived this out experientially, and I know that God's way truly is best. So as an example, earlier this week I was reading the kind of book that I like to read, dystopian science fiction, stuff like that. And I was having a hard time with this one. It felt like a narrative example of Robert Greene's The 48 Rules of Power. It's just awful. It's all about, okay, here's one group of humanity that is treating another group of humanity as its terrible slaves and oppressing them and mistreating them. So what's the solution to this problem? Well, the solution is that the oppressed people need to seize power by whatever means necessary to end up becoming like the people they hate, and then using their newfound power to dominate them instead. So we're going to steal and cheat and lie and backbite and kill and do whatever it takes because we need power instead of them. And I'm like, I can't get behind this. That is how some people say the world works. But let me ask you, let me suggest to you, I don't think that is actually how the world works. Would anyone here be willing to tell me what the most influential person who has ever lived, what his name was? Yeah, Jesus. If not him, I'd be hard-pressed to think of anyone else. All right, here's a guy who currently has at least 4 billion people on planet Earth who think he is either the Son of God or at least a prophet of God. That's pretty significant. The entire world dates their calendar based on when he was born. All right, entire civilizations and movements of art and humanity and science have been birthed out of belief in this guy, and we are talking about him down to today by a first-name basis. And even the people who don't believe in him use his name as a swear word. So it'd be hard to argue that anyone has changed human history more than Jesus, but the guy never carried a sword. And he never led an army. And he never went to acquire political power. And he made no inventions of human ingenuity, and he wrote no books. And instead of having a will to dominate his enemies, instead his will was to lay his life down on behalf of his enemies. And the world will never, ever, ever be the same. So what is actually the solution to the problem of human evil? What story are we telling? And people who don't acknowledge God will say, well, then we have to get power for ourselves. And I go, I think that's a horrible way to live, and I don't think that reflects reality. I think Jesus' way is actually much, much better. I was talking to a girl working in a medical facility this week, and I asked her, how do you like your job? You've been here 5 years. She's like, it's a job. It's like, okay, bummer. That's a lot of life to be lived doing something that is kind of sucking your soul. But all right, well, what about the rest of life? What really gives you joy? And she's like, not really anything. It's like, oh, that's concerning. What gives you hope? Nothing. This sounds pretty depressing. She's like, well, I'm young. I'll live. I'm like, yeah, for a long time. Hopeless, terrible, monotonous drudgery. Good luck with that. Does human life have any purpose? Is it just, well, we're all going to die one day, so therefore find pleasure at wherever you can find it, whatever the cost. Since we're going to die, then it doesn't really matter. You might as well get as much pleasure right now. And you guys look out and see, how does that go for people? Is it crazy that God would say that actually killing those desires inside of us that are bad for us and living a life of trusting Him and of self-control and peace, is it crazy that we would say we have tested and actually found God's way, go figure, is really actually best? The more we renew our minds, the more our hearts are transformed, the more we're like, guys, listen up. We have tested and found that God's will is actually good and perfect and true. Who knew? Who knew? So we got to think more about it. We have to live in light of the gospel and then have the right experiences, live it out, and be changed. But it all starts with the brain. Or as Paul says in Romans 8, look, if you set your mind on the things of the flesh, you'll die. If you set your mind on the things of the Spirit, you will have life and peace. So I like to think of it like tuning into the radio station. You know, it's a channel. And you can twist that knob until like, oh, here's God's Spirit. Now let's live in light of this. So that's how to get on with God. But what about one another? Paul continues, by the grace given to me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. I don't know if you realize throughout Romans, but pride is a big theme. It begins back in chapter 1. You know, the ungodly people, they are proud and they are boastful. And we're like, yeah, we know. And he says, and you religious hypocrites are also proud and boastful. And the ungodly are like, yeah, we knew that. And Paul says, but the thing is, no one is actually living for God, doing the right things. And so, we all stand guilty before God. But now, because of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ, apart from having to be the right kind of people or do the right kind of things, we can be saved. We can be declared righteous. So, he says in chapter 3, where then is boasting? He says, it's excluded. Even for a guy like Father Abraham, he has no ground to stand on. Even for a guy like King David, no boasting. So who do you think you are? By the grace given to me, I say, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. But rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith that God has distributed to each of you, which means even our faith is not our own. It's a gift that comes to us from God. So if you are interacting with another Jesus follower and you're just like, man, I don't know about you. Remind yourself, did Jesus actually have to die in order to save me? Yeah, okay. Did Jesus have to die to save them? Yeah. Did he think you were worth it? Yes. Did he think they were worth it? Yeah. Okay. So there is no upper tier Christian here. There is no like, I know for like Ivy League schools, you have the people who like went through the normal application process, and then you have the inheritance, like heritage members, like your great granddaddy gave $1 billion to this school, so we're going to accept you. It's like there's no plan with God. Everyone gets in by faith in Jesus and Jesus alone. So let's not think that we're better than one another. And even this idea that God has distributed to people different amounts of faith was convicting to me in this last year. Let's imagine for a sec that here's this person that you're trying to work something out with. Maybe they hold a conviction that you don't hold. And you're trying to talk to them about it, and you can tell that they're wrong, but also that they do love Jesus, that they are genuinely seeking to respond to God's work in their lives, and they're growing. But they don't agree with you, or it's just not working. They don't get it. They're struggling in an area that you've never struggled with them before. You're like, why can't you just understand it? Maybe it's the fact that God has not given them the amount of faith that he's given you. So instead of judging them, you should show up and just serve them and leave it in God's hands. For just as each of us has one body with many members, hooray for that, and these members don't all have the same functions, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. I've said it before, I'll say it again. This means, guys, that God has saved you and blessed you and given you gifts that I need. That I cannot be like Jesus apart from you. You, whoever you are and whatever gift God has given you, are like a micronutrient to my spiritual well-being, and vice versa. We need one another. And, family of grace, I'll say this, because Eric's right, it has been a hard season. But this doesn't change, actually. We still need God's people in our lives. We still need one another. We still have gifts for one another, even in the hard times, maybe especially in the hard times. But what this does say is that no matter what happens, and no matter where we go, we need the church, as messy and broken and frustrating as God's people can be. This is God's plan, that we are involved in relationship with one another. Because Paul says, look, we have different gifts according to what God has given to each of us. So if your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. Bring God's message to God's people about the situation that's going on. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. And if it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. 7 representative gifts. I don't think the list is exhaustive, but I'll tell you what, every single one of these cannot be done by yourself. They are gifts from God for other people. So we still need you, and you still need us. And we're going to hang in there, and we're going to see what's next. But wherever we go and wherever we go from here, being part of a church and being part of God's body is essential if we are to love and serve God. Think about the gospel. You know, in another line, I don't know if you had a fight with someone this morning. Maybe they're related to you. Maybe they're married to you. Maybe it's an old friend. Maybe it's a new enemy. I don't know. Maybe, just maybe, you might be tempted to think, I'm so frustrated and I'm so done with this person that, you know what, I don't want to make the effort. When they come to the table, I will show up to the table. I'm going to wait for them to act first. Has anyone ever experienced that temptation? I saw one. Thank you, the one person who nodded. Yeah, okay, there's a few more of you, thanks. I hate to admit it, guys, but Paul says we have to think about the gospel, to think it through and then to live it out. So when that happens, let us ask ourselves this question: did God wait for us to show up to the table before he acted to come and save us? Did Jesus wait for humanity to say, we're sorry, God, please come help us, before he showed up to die on our behalf? I don't think he did. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So I would propose, family of grace, that there is no room for us as Christians to ever say that the other person has to come to the table before we do. I think the only response in light of the gospel is to say that we show up at the table and we wait for them there. That we are willing to act first, even though that's frustrating and grievous. But I will say this, I have learned in my life that, you know what? Humbling myself to act first to reconcile is always shown to work better than holding myself away from reconciling until they change. It really is a better way to live. So this is just, again, one example. And Paul would have us do this for all of life. What has God done for me? And in light of that, how am I supposed to respond? What has Jesus accomplished for me? And in light of that, how should I live? What does the scriptures say is true? And in light of that, how do I view the world? And so if you're watching Star Wars and you're like, this whole thing about like the light side and the dark side and the need for them to be in balance, like, actually, no. Actually, you know, at that point, you might as well call them like red side and blue side. And that the universe needs to be purple. Like you have taken away anything that actually makes evil evil because you made it necessary. No. The Bible says that evil is something that has been brought into God's good world, and one day God is going to deal with it and get rid of it. We don't need a balance here, folks. Star Trek says that science and human ingenuity can solve the problems of the universe. And we're like, actually, the problem is in the human heart, and no science fiction thing can solve that. All right, every 4 years when we have a political election, the world goes crazy and thinks if we have the right kind of leader, all our problems will be solved. And we're like, respectfully, no, it hasn't worked ever. And also we know that no human leader can solve the problem of the human heart. We need the gospel. Now, it's still important, but it's just not on the level of like identity in my world coming unglued. Because God controls the rules of the human heart. All right, everything that happens, we're just running it through the gospel filter. What does the gospel say? How do I think it out? And then how do we live in light of it? And we just do this on repeat, over and over and over again. Why? Because God saved us. Because Christ died for us. And because if we don't, then we're just telling God and everybody else that Jesus doesn't really matter. That we weren't worth saving. that this whole thing is like a nice add-on, but really of no consequence. And I think God is worth more than that. A couple of you might remember this story. Years ago, at a church plant called Endeavor, which, yes, became part of Family of Grace. There was a guy named Ben who walked into the church building one day to talk to the pastor. See, Ben had a problem. Ben was a hardened felon. The dude had served some serious time, and life wasn't looking too good. But he didn't want to go back to prison. In fact, he wanted to come to Jesus. But the problem is that the gang that Ben was a part of, the Mexican Mafia, was a blood-in, blood-out gang. So to get in, Ben had to kill somebody, and he did. And to get out, Ben had to take a bullet with his name written on it, if you catch my drift. You're part of us, and you don't get to leave. So what to do? And Ben is stuck. Well, I don't remember if it was days or weeks later, Ben shows up with some incredible news. In the bylaws of the Mexican Mafia, and yes, they have bylaws, likely due to the influence of the Catholic Church down in Mexico, it is written in the bylaws that if you are a member of the gang and you want to become a Christian, Christ has died for you. Jesus is bled out. I know. Yeah. I asked to see a copy of it. Yeah. He's bled out. But if you come to Christ, let me tell you what, your life cannot ever go back to being the same. They'll never let you back in. In fact, they're going to look at you to be a different kind of person from here on out. Because someone died for you. And he's worth more than a few drinks, isn't he? If this is true, then it changes everything. If it's true, then it changes my present, it changes my future. But it starts, guys, we have to think about it. Think it through, and then live it out. Because I think he's worth it. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, God, I don't know where Benny ended up. I think he might have gone back to prison. But Lord, I do pray that the gospel would take root in his life and in ours. God, you've called us to be holy and pleasing, a living sacrifice before you. And yet, God, the truth of the matter is often it feels like we're a pretty poor return on investment for you. And so we can't do it without you, and we thank you that you are the God that has already showed that we didn't have to earn anything from you. You didn't save us because we did good works, but you did save us so that we can respond with good works. And Father, I pray that this truth of the gospel would take deeper root in our lives so that we might begin to live out your will here on earth, that your will might be done on earth as it is in heaven, that other people might come to taste and see that you are good. Help us, God, because we are very used to the way the world works, and learning a new pattern of life is difficult. And so may we renew our minds and keep in step with the Spirit and be transformed. For your glory and for our good, for the good of the church and for the good of the world. We ask for your grace. And we thank you for being our loving Father who will never, ever, ever give up on us. Not because we're awesome, but because you are. And in Christ's name we pray. Amen.